Welcome, Dominators, to another episode of StabDominations War Academy. And today's topic is offensive war collisions. As you may know, guys, you have. Let's look at it in Armory. You have possible 5 offensive collisions and 4 defensive collisions in the selection. And what offensive collisions should you prioritize with your army composition? It's rather important to know that if you have space for one or one offensive collision, then what is the best one for your army composition? Or if you have 2 or even 3, then what are the right ones to use? So just to show an example, with a regular mixed army, for example, Foras, one of our guest members, is using 3 offensive collisions. He's using Americans, Aztecs, and Cherokee. Are these the 3 best ones? I would say that pretty close, but maybe instead of Americans, it would be better to use Mongols. That actually synergizes with the Aztecs. But to explain it a bit better, let's jump into Dominations Master. So, as you can see here, guys, these are the 5 offensive coalitions that we are talking about. Americans, Aztecs, Cherokee, Ethiopians, and Mongols. And the pictures according as well. So just to understand what kind of bonuses are available from the coalitions, let's take the base values first, change a bit. So what you know is, for example, Aztecs are one of the most popular ones. So the Aztecs bonus is for your barrack troops, 35% damage increase and also 35% damage as well as HP bonus for your mercenaries. And we're talking today about atomic age level troops. So these are your tank destroyers that will benefit a lot from Aztecs coalition. Then you have Americans that will give air units some HP bonus as well as the factory units damage bonus. You have Cherokee that only gives HP bonus for your barrack troops and increases the healing for your supply convoys. Then you have Ethiopians that actually have HP bonus for the factory troops and damage for the generals. But the damage for the generals in general is not very valued coalition because your generals, you have only 3 and quite limited bonus on that. And they are very high hit point units, so they would rather benefit from hit point bonuses. And then you have Mongols that actually gives bonus only specific troops, your cannons and mortars, as well as the war tactics. But in general, the damage dealing war tactics are not often used and not recommended because you have much more value from decoys than the damage dealing tactics. But just a note as well, these are the base values, but if you have finished your Moctezuma in university, your bonuses will be following. So instead of the base 40, you will get 52, and instead of 35, you will get 45. So these are the actual bonuses that are available for me and for most of you, I guess, who have prioritized Moctezuma. And it's rather important to get that one completed fast. And actually, to explain a bit better which coalition has the most value, I've given the numbers based on 3, in my opinion, most popular army compositions. Number 1 is the mixed army with bazooka troops, and this is one of my favorite army compositions. If you have also watched my previous episode in War Academy, where I explained why the bazookas are so important. If you have not, then please go check this one out as well. And these are factory units. So the army composition one is basically 5 strike fighters, 9 field officers, 31 ranged infantry, 13 bazookas, 2 tactical helicopters for healing, and then 3 generals. While all the other troops are maxed out, I've used here in the calculations level 21 generals: Churchill, Joan of Arc, and Napoleon. And the reason why I did it so, I would prefer to show also level 50 generals, but I don't have the full stats from the level 50 generals yet, and I couldn't find them online as well. So these level 21 stats I can confirm because I have developed them to 21 level. So that's why I've used also generals level 21. And for mercenaries, we have the tank destroyers. For Army 1. For Army 2, this is basically very popular army compositions that a lot of you have probably used, because this is the mixed army composition popular with the British nationality, with a lot of ranged infantry, 83 in that manner, and then 9 field officers, and basically a couple of healings, and that's it. And then you have your tanks with the generals as well as the mercenaries. And the last army composition I've used in this example is heavy tank composition. So basically you have 6 heavy tanks, a couple of elite infantries, some field officers for your alliance army, a couple of ranged infantry from your alliance army. So this, I haven't used heavy tanks myself for quite some time, but this is what I've seen good players using these days a lot. So these are the 3 different army compositions, and just to be noted as well, it's the full army with your air units, generals, your alliance troop space. So overall troop capacity is here 188 from your alliance gate as well as your barracks space, and then you have your generals, strike fighters, and mercenaries, as well as the and that's it. So altogether it's 202 unit spaces. And you can see how the army compositions are split as well. Number 1 is quite balanced army composition between factory units and barrack troops. And of course, this shift can be always changed if you take more bazookas into the composition, for example. And then number 2 army is very focused on the barrack troops. The only factory troops here are the tactical helicopters for healing. And then army number 3 is very heavily factory unit focused. Only some barrack troops from your alliance gate, as well as a couple of elite infantry. And then air units are all the same, and the mercenaries and generals are all the same as well for all 3 army compositions. So I've used these because I think these will explain my thinking process the best. So let's go now further down to these 3 different army compositions. So let's look them one by one. Army 1, Army 2, and Army 3. So first of all, maybe look at this red area here. So this shows the value of your army without any coalitions. So for example, my favorite army composition with the bazookas is able to deal 46,000 DPS versus buildings. and 63 DPS versus units, and it has total 283,000 hit points, while your army 2 has only 25,000 hit damage versus buildings, 59,000 hit point DPS versus units, and 275,000 hit points. So basically, the only reason why Army 2 is successful is basically the British army composition, because they have the extra range, and that will benefit a lot. Although from the pure stats perspective, it doesn't look like a very attractive composition. But if you're British, then this extra range actually benefits you a lot. But still, army number 1 is definitely able to clear the bases faster, because the damage versus buildings is extremely important in getting a good and quick time. And then army number 3 is the heavy tank composition. And what is the best behind this heavy tank composition is that look at the hit points versus the other 2 army compositions. It almost has double the hit points versus these previous 2. And this is because heavy tanks have a lot of hit points, plus you also don't have to take any healing units like tactical helicopters. So 24 unit space, you can, instead of those healing units, can take 1 additional heavy tank. So in that perspective, this army number 3 has a lot of potential. And also, if you look at the damage versus buildings, 35,000. So it's in between these 2 army compositions, a little bit less than with the bazookas. But for example, damage versus units is even higher for this heavy tank composition. And at the moment, I have not used also the area damage multiplier. So meaning that the heavy tanks actually do splash damage. So you can even basically double the damage versus units here, because whenever the units get clumped up, and for example, if the stronghold spawns, then heavy tanks are also very good in dealing versus elephant archers, as well as all the other masses of troops that come out from the stronghold. So a lot of potential, but also some limitations that I will not go into at the moment. So explaining the armies, and now I would go explaining the impact or effects of different war coalitions. And as you can see here, I have ranked them all for different armies based on the total value. So damage plus hit points. So it's not the total truth what you see on the picture, but we will explain it a bit better. So in my opinion, if you're going with a mixed army with bazookas, your number 1 choice always should be Aztecs. Because what you can see here is Aztecs gives you very solid damage increase, 6,000 and 8,000 versus units, 6,000 versus buildings. That's the more important one, in my opinion, because units you can always kite around with decoys and strike fighters. And it also gives you 34,000 hit points. And this 34,000 hit points, if you scroll up, the Aztecs actually gives your mercenaries. So your tank destroyers are much tougher, and it's rather important because your tank destroyers are your meat shield against the missile silo. So you need to make sure that these tank destroyers will stay alive as long as possible, so that you are able to snipe the missile silo with your main army at the same time. As a second choice, second option, there is Americans. And what's the big benefit for Americans is that actually the damage that you're getting out of it is even better than Aztecs, because the damage you're getting for factory troops, and these are your bazookas. So and bazookas do mainly higher damage versus buildings, so that's why it benefits buildings damage a bit better. So 10,000 versus 6,000. So if you are not afraid of getting smashed out by the missile silo and are just aiming for the quickest time, then with this mixed army, with bazookas, you should even benefit or choose Americans. And it gives 11,000 hit points also for your strike fighters, and that's also very valuable because your strike fighters are often in the middle of the damage. As a third option, you have either Ethiopians, Cherokee, or Mongols. My clear benefit or choice would be Mongols, because the additional 7,000 damage versus buildings is extremely beneficial and will fasten up your times versus the enemy bases quite a bit. And also, why Mongols? Because Mongols actually synergizes very well with Aztecs. And why is it so is that Mongols, instead of additional damage that is calculated from your unit's base values, it actually gives attack rate bonus. So, and that means that this attack rate bonus will actually benefit from all the different damage bonuses that you're getting for these troops, cannons, from the other library, university developments as well. So this is why it actually increases the impact of these Mongols coalition. As you can see, if you would only use Mongols without the Aztecs, you would only get additional 5,000 damage. But if you're using it with Aztecs, it goes close to 7,000 additional damage for your army. So my choice would be Aztecs, Americans, and then Mongols, because the additional hit points for your barrack units, this is basically your range infantry and your cannons. You don't benefit a lot from that. And the Ethiopians give the hit points to your factory troops. Also, I would still take rather the additional damage. And if you are playing with Army 2, mixed army with ranged infantry, so these are you guys who are choosing British mainly, then your number one choice is always Aztecs, because Aztecs is damage bonus for your barrack troops, and also hit points for your mercenaries, as well as the damage for the mercenaries. So thus the Aztecs is clearly the most important war coalition for the mixed ranged infantry armies. But now, if you look at the other coalitions, there isn't actually a second really good option for you guys to choose. And that is one more benefit towards balancing your army between factory and barrack troops. Because if you're only going with barrack troops, then you don't really have good war coalitions to use that benefit you, as well as, for example, with the bazookas. I can use both Americans and Aztecs that benefit me a lot. But here you have basically only Aztecs. And then you can choose Cherokee and Americans for the additional hit points, or Mongols. My personal order would be Aztecs number 1, Mongols to support and synergize with the Aztecs. Then it's Cherokee, extra hit points for your main army. Americans is really only benefiting the hit point part to the fighter planes, and a little bit of additional damage, and that is, it's not actually damage, it's the healing impact from your tactical helicopters. So you are rather limited in your war coalitions if you are British and going with your only ranged infantry. So after this video, I hope you consider switching in some bazookas and benefiting a lot more from Americans' war coalition, for example. And then your third army composition, heavy tanks. And heavy tanks, the clear winner here is Ethiopians, because the Ethiopians will benefit your heavy tanks immensely, because these are very high hit point units, and additional hit points will go a long way in the battle. So you will get additional 100,000 hit points for your army if you're activating Ethiopians. And the second choice, although you may think that Americans, of course, because Americans benefits additional damage for the factory troops. Actually, it's Aztecs. Aztecs will benefit you more than Americans if you're going with heavy tank combo, because Aztecs also gives damage and hit points to your mercenaries. And the Aztecs is the only coalition that gives the benefit both damage and hit points to your important part of the army, while all the others are giving only damage or hit points. So thus actually it's extremely important to get your mercenaries higher hit points as well, and benefit almost close to the same attack damage as well as your Americans would. And then the third option is Americans, and as well as with this composition as well, you don't really have anything else to choose. These are the three coalitions you can use, because the rest already benefit. Cherokee and Mongols already benefit only barrack troops, basically. So these are your three war coalitions in the same order as you can see on the picture here. And also to highlight now the total impact of your three best war coalitions: Aztecs, Americans, and Mongols. In my mixed bazooka army composition, the impact is following. So without the coalitions, my damage is 46,000 versus buildings, but the coalitions will give me additional 22,000 damage versus buildings. So basically, I'm 50% stronger if I would have three war coalitions active. And actually, you can see that all of them benefit me pretty similarly: Americans, Aztecs, and Mongols. So they are all important and build up the additional damage that you're looking for. So TPS versus units, 63,000 goes up by 15,000. Only 25% additional damage, so not as important, but the main effect comes from damage versus buildings, and this is more important as well. Because the Mongols only gives you DPS versus buildings because cannons are not shooting enemy infantry or enemy troops. And the hit points, 283 goes up by 45,000. So another 20% increase here, a little bit less even. So not that special, but what is important here is that the hit points are going to the right troops, your mercenaries that actually need these additional hit points quite a bit. Then your range infantry composition, as you can see, TPS versus buildings 25,000 will go up additional 14,000. Rather good increase because it's more than 50% damage increase versus buildings. But altogether, you can see that you're benefiting less from the war coalitions than you would if you would have a mixed army composition between factory and barrack troops. So clear benefit to the mixed bazooka army composition again. TPS versus units, additional 12,000 on top of the 59,000 that you have without war coalitions. And then hit points, similar effect as with the bazooka composition, mainly comes from the Aztecs. And then a huge benefit also for the heavy tank army with your war coalitions, because from 505,000 hit points, you're going up to 650,000 hit points. So basically, you can cruise through the bases and only need to worry about the anti-tank guns. So But of course, keep in mind that I've used their max developments from the university for all of these troops. So heavy tanks are quite down the path. I have not developed any heavy tanks yet in the university, and I'm guessing that a lot of you also haven't had a chance to do it yet. But if you will, then the army composition definitely has a lot of potential. And you can see damage versus building also goes up more than around 30%. DPS versus units goes up also over 20%. So quite a good beneficiary from the war coalitions. So this was the guide to offensive war coalitions. I hope you guys learned something, and let me know in the comments if there's some other topics that you would like me to deep dive into and explain a bit better. Cheers, and see you guys in the war.